astrology, the sun and moon represent the masculine and feminine principles, while Aries and Libra represent the axis of relationships. Tune in when Chris Flisher and his Aries sun go head-to-head with Debra Clement and her Libra moon about a subject near and dear to everyone's heart. Relationships. Will the ram run roughshod over a weltering Libra moon, or will the moon's sweet powers of persuasion stop the Aries beast in his tracks? To find out, tune in to a very special presentation of He Says, She Says Astrology with Chris Flisher and Debra Clement.
Hello, I'm Chris Flisher.
And I'm Debra Ann Clement.
And we're back with He Says,
She Says Astrology.
Yeah, we've been gone for a while, but we're back. And we're coming back under He Says, She Says Astrology. This is going to be our own separate podcast. We're happy to be back. We've been gone for a while. And we're starting out our first couple of shows here talking about, well, we always talked about relationships, but we're basically going to be drilling into the sort of the houses, the four. We're going to be doing the four, we're called the four angular houses, right, Debra?
Right. That's where we're starting.
So we did the first, we're doing the fourth, the seventh, and the 10th will be and there's the houses that are ruled called by the angle. Those are the four cardinal points.
And they're important points.
Yeah. So we're talking, when we think about the fourth is typically, that's the house that, at the area of the chart that we look at to Cancer as the sort of the guiding light there. And that speaks perfectly. It's just, it's classic. It's the mother.
It's the maternal or the nurturing parent. Right? And it's also the home. And to some extent, it's family, even though specific family members can be found in other houses in the chart, but it's home. It's a home and family.
It's sort of your security place, which is interesting because Cancer is the sort of the sign that provides that security. When we think of Cancer, I always think of the moon. I think of the mother, and there's no one who doesn't love you more than your mother. That's not to say fathers don't love you as well, but your mother is the one that bore you. She has that visceral, physical connection with you that you can't erase, and that's indicative in the fourth house.
No, in Cancer, it's about emotional security. But when you think about it, you really can't be truly emotionally secure, like if you're not financially secure. So that security really takes in everything. Yes. Yeah,
and that is a good point. And the home is, so it's a metaphor for home, and it's a metaphor for house. So a house is not a home. We know that. That's an old adage that applies. But you find your root there, your comfort there. It's where you go back to seek sympathy and empathy and welcome and love.
I think it's your tribe. And sometimes you're related to them and sometimes you're not. But I find that the fourth house is very much about your tribe.
Yeah, it's your core where you return to in times of stress. Those are the ones you turn to support you. It can also be your domicile. So it also has that part of it too, but when we see that, so if we're looking at this through the lens of relationship, obviously we have a relationship with this. And even some people don't have a very good relationship with their parents. There still is a part of them that feels that in the pit of their stomachs, that sense of, longing even, I guess is what it would be in that case.
My personal belief has always been that certainly all children, I've known a lot of people over the years who were, very estranged from their parents, had whatever issues with their parents. But at the end of the day, no child says, I want to be at odds with my parent.
No, they would never happen. That just happens through virtue of different stages of life. I know that I was very rebellious when I was younger, and just as I got into my Saturn return years, I started to realize that there was more value to the family than not, probably because of the very nature of what the Saturn return implies. And it really
grew up. You started to grow up.
Oh, it took me a long time. I'm not sure I'm there yet. I'm waiting for my third Saturn return to grow up.
All right, I'll let you know if you pass or not. Okay.
Good to know you're out there watching me. But the fourth house is, I think of it as, it is your physical house. When I look at when you do sort of horoscopic astrology and you see something happening in someone's fourth house, you can pretty much guarantee that there's going to be something that has to do with the family there. Whether that's a family member, welcoming a new family member, saying goodbye to a family member, moving, renovations even.
No, and something to when you're looking, speaking of the fourth house, we think of the fourth house, like you say, the residence. But the truth is the fourth house is any kind of property. I mean, it could be a cemetery, it could be a hotel, it could be an office. So sometimes when there is a lot of activity to the fourth house, and it seems like, God, someone's moving. And if they're not moving or changing or making a change in their residence, it can often turn out to represent a change at their office.
Interesting, because so that would be reflected in some ways through either their 6th or their 10th as well, I would imagine.
The connection will be there, but if there's that fourth house as well, and because the 6th gets tricky, because you can say, well, you're changing in the home, and the 6th house, your daily routine is changing, so it may not be work, and it can get a little, even the 10th house is your status, but usually when the 6th or 10th is involved in the 4th, it can very often be connected to a change at the job, could be changing office, or just that circumstances are changing in the office. Maybe you're going to get a different office, maybe coworkers, people are coming in the office, new people being hired or leaving. So yeah, it's something has a little bit broader. We tend to forget it because I tend to think of it more as the home as well.
Well, you raise a good point though, because in that occupational office that you mentioned is a sense of security. I mean, that's where you're getting your income supposedly, and that does provide you with a sense of security. So you've got to pay homage to that in that regard.
And the fourth house, I use the word tribe or clan, and the point is, sometimes we go to work and we're just at work and there are coworkers, but then there are people who work and, depending on the type of work that is and how closely that they work together, that it is a much more of, I'm going to say, a tight-knit type of group.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. And so then we look at all the words that when we associate home, we think of food, we think of comfort, we think of, the smells of the kitchen filled with a turkey or chocolate chip cookies or whatever. All those things are reminiscent of that sense of security. We think of warm blankets. We think of being cozy inside of a rainstorm or a snowstorm. Those are all very fourth house kinds of characteristics that we see.
It's comfort.
Comfort.
Right? Being comfortable. Yeah. Being comfortable and being secure.
Yeah, and it's nice. So we see that when we see the different planets, when you have a planet in that house, those planets are going to be lit up by that, or if it's going to be lit up in that regard because you're going to have. Well, let's just do a couple of examples. I mean, if you have Moon in the 4th house, you're going to have that on overdrive.
No, absolutely. The Moon in the 4th house, very often people who are like, they like company, but it's like, come to my house. They prefer being in their own home, in their own circumstances, than they do rather, I'm going to say, visiting outside the home. Is also considered to be a very, I'm going to say, patriotic, or interested in home or interested in their community placement as well.
Well, that's interesting you mentioned that, because the United States we consider ourselves to be very patriotic, and we are a Cancer nation. So that plays right directly into that. Now, we should clarify that if you have a rising sign, that 4th house may be determined by a different sign. So we have to just verify that. But we're just talking about kind of the idea of what that looks like and how that would play out. But that's interesting about the United States, because we are, give us your tired, weary travelers, even though that may not be the case today. At least it was part of our original charter.
And the sun, just we talked about the moon, but I just want to mention the sun, because the 4th house, when you look at the horoscope, it's beneath the horizon. It's not at the public part of the chart. It's the inner, right? And so when you have the sun in the 4th house, and here's the sun, it's how you want to shine, right? And the sun is out there. But in that 4th house, very often a person with the 4th house sun can be someone who works behind the scenes or is a little bit more comfortable being behind the scenes.
The old phrase of keeping the home fires burning is perfect for that, because you're right. It is below the horizon, and as a result, that's more removed from public sight, which would be appropriate. We keep a lot of secrets at home. We don't want people to know everything that goes on. We don't want to air our dirty laundry, so we keep that beneath the covers, and it's completely appropriate in that regard.
And the home is usually very important. I find that people have either the moon or the sun in the 4th house. Having their own home, owning a home, is a big priority. They just generally being a tenant or having to move a lot, not so much they want to do that. Though the moon Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say the moon, wherever we find the moon, there's some fluctuation. So sometimes the moon in the fourth house, there are a number of moves over the course of the lifetime.
Yeah, I liked your points you made earlier about, the Cancer does not mind, or someone in the fourth house does not mind being the host of a party. Come to my house. You're right. There's a great sense of comfort there. Even if it implies that they have to do more work, they're still more comfortable having it at their home. And by extension, when we look at today's world and we see people who get together and get divorced and then get remarried, and stepbrothers and stepsisters all come into that same sort of under that same umbrella, because you're going to find that quality there. That's also, it involves all those extraneous, like blended families or relative by marriage only kind of things. So cousins and all that's come into effect as well.
I like to think of the fourth house as, the ties that bind and sometimes the ties that strangle.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I mean, there is that sense of closeness there, and there's that sense of sensitivity that comes along with that as well. I think that's a good point. When we're sort of at our rawest point, our most, I guess we could say, you're going to be most like yourself in that position, I'd imagine, in your home, because you'd be the most secure. So you're going to see a person's flaws there, perhaps more than otherwise, right? Does that make sense to you?
It's familiar.
Familiar, yeah. And we know what familiarity does.
That's true.
It breeds contempt. And so oftentimes we'll see this, within the dynamic of a family, contempt, people having this and that. But I think it's an important characteristic to raise up.
Mercury in the fourth house, just because we're talking about the planets. And what I find when Mercury's in the fourth, it's usually, I'm going to use the word, a very active house, because you're talking about like a lot of relatives, a lot of family, could be neighbors, could be children. Mercury in the fourth house usually speaks to a home. There's just a lot going on.
Yeah. What's interesting, when you're looking, and I've done this before, I've had in my town, there's neighborhoods where we have cul-de-sacs, and there's certain houses in the cul-de-sac where all the kids would go after school. And that typically is a house that's got a very strong, Cancer component to it. The person is the one who makes the cookies for the kids after school and all that stuff. And I've seen this played out many times in different places in my life where this sort of environment and kind of scene was very prevalent.
I also want to just mention, because Mercury is connected to the mind in the fourth house, because the fourth house also it's an intuitive house.
Yes, very much
right.
So.
And so Mercury in the fourth house sometimes actually will indicate, a good intuition.
Yeah, exactly. And intuition is a very strong quality of that sort of what we were talking about. If we think of, and we know this to be the case, we think of the house as being the fourth house as being the maternal quality. This is where we would see that characteristic come out.
Definitely. But moving on to Venus, if I may.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Venus in the fourth house, I find very often, from my experience with clients, Venus in the fourth house, and again, here's what I'm going to say, people have good taste or they enjoy their home. Basically, Venus in the fourth house, I feel that whatever is in their home, whatever they're looking at, the painting that's on the wall or the vase, it's there because they really like it. Give them something that they don't like, they'll smile, they'll find a wonderful place for, in the Salvation Army or in the closet, but it's definitely... they enjoy, it's the beauty of the home. It is very often there's talent there, or at least an interest in things like interior decorating.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, interior decorating is very strong. And that's the whole idea. I talk about that is as the idea of trying to, that whole fourth house quality. And what we would see as a characteristic there, this sense of, obviously security, all those, where there's plenty of adjectives you can apply. That's why I use things like, turkeys in the oven and chocolate chip cookies and warm blankets and fireplaces, because as you said, that's all about the security of the environment.
So what do you think about Mars in the fourth house?
Well, Mars in the fourth house is interesting. I think that there would be it isn't exactly happy there, is what I would say, largely because I think they want to expand. But I think Mars in there could be represent a very powerful drive to do things in the house, sort of make that house constantly a chart. I mean, a house that might be in constant flux, renovations going up, moving furniture around, driven to sort of get things done, action oriented. Obviously, those are all words that apply to Mars.
I find that Mars in the fourth sometimes, and of course I will say qualifying depends on the rest of the chart, very often indicates an early environment, a lot of arguments. a lot of strife.
True.
Yeah, a lot of discord.
There can be that tension there because Mars tends to bring that combative quality to it. There's sort of that can come out. And oftentimes you may find two parents that don't get along in that quality, which then brings in the stepbrothers. And that's the next step. Or the stepsisters is the next step if they don't get along. And of course, that can be a real challenge. What would it look like if we saw the chart of a blended family and they weren't getting along? Would there be a strong Mars component in the fourth?
Or connections between the fourth house and the 11th, because the 11th is actually associated with step siblings as well. Yeah, that's interesting. So Jupiter, very different energy in the fourth house. And so I'm just going to say, to me, Jupiter in the fourth house, big homes, or at least space, skylights, bright, open layouts. I need my own room. I need my own office. Could you get out of my way?
Yeah, a sense of abundance too, sort of a very generous, lively, a very sort of visible sort of family, perhaps, one that's like, in all the kids are involved in the sports teams or whatever, sort of that very public, visible, expansive, optimistic kind of character.
And sometimes a big family.
Big family, yeah. The old Irish Catholics.
And I was going to say an extended family. Yeah, an extended family.
I think that's true. I think extended family is a very good way of looking at it because, this is not such necessarily a model that we see in our culture, but it is in many cultures where grandparents live with their children and they take care of the grandchildren. And there's that sort of that extended family you're talking about.
Yeah, I grew up that way,
Your grandparents were in the house? Yeah.
My grandmother was in the house. Yeah, she had an apartment downstairs, but she lived with us. She was with us all the time. And then, years later after my divorce, I was with my mom, and my mother absolutely, helped me raise my daughter. So, I could never would have went to law school, can tell you that much, without her. And, in my culture, my ancestry was Italian, of course. That's just the way it's done.
I know. We sort of have varied from that in some ways in our culture. But did you find that, your relationship with your grandmother to be different than your mother? I mean, obviously it would be, but did you find a certain sense of a deeper connection to her in some ways?
I am the youngest of 26 grandchildren. So my grandmother was, quite old when I was born, but I was very close to her, and I was the youngest grandchild. So, I actually was her favorite. And
but of course I
was. And she was a Leo, by the way, but it was different because, like I say, even at the time. So my relationship with my mother, though, fortunately, we got along great, which is not to say we got along all the time, by any means. She was a Taurus with Scorpio rising and a Virgo moon. So, sort of enough said there. But yeah, but so for me it worked. But again, it's growing up, it was very common. It was just very common in terms of, I'm going to say, the culture.
Again, that speaks to that sense of security, which comes back to, which is really the key word for the fourth house. It's about security. It's represented by Cancer. It's it's the cardinal water sign. And in that, we find the sense of empathy. We find nurture, we find maternal qualities. And interesting that, I think as we look out across the society, we see ourselves entering into a more of a feminine kind of quality. Maybe just this is happening. I don't think it's happening just in the United States, maybe happening around the world, where women are stepping into greater roles. We see a much, more leading roles being taken over by women. I think this speaks to that strong maternal quality as well, which we are, I think, long overdue, but rapidly heading towards.
But, we're talking about the fourth house and the nurturing, especially. When Saturn's in the fourth house, it is a bit of I hate to say a wet blanket, but certainly to say
I think that's the right word. I think it's a wet blanket.
On the fourth house.
Yeah.
And very often, again, early life, early childhood, there could be a lot of limitations. A lot of times it's economic. The security issue is, we don't have enough to eat, or we don't have as much as someone else.
Right. It's resources. It's all about resources.
Yeah.
Saturn is about resources. When it's in the fourth house, you're going to find that resources are stunted or lacking of, or there may be a certain very strict quality to it. Strict parents, a very stringent mother or father. And even though I have a good relationship with Saturn as a rule, I find that there can be a certain sobriety to that, which means a certain, distance or just, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, sobriety is the best word. I mean, maybe not overly effusive and bubbly. I think it's more of sober like.
And the other thing too, even if it's not, sometimes it is, I agree with you, a strict environment. And if it's not strict, a lot of times there's a lot of responsibility. You have to take care of your, 3 younger siblings or whatever, or have a lot of household obligations to do at a very young age. But Saturn is, like I say, a little bit of a...
Yeah, that's a good question. You're sort of, if you were come into a family and you've got Saturn in your 4th and you're the oldest sister or the older brother, you are going to be taking care of the rest, and you're going to sort of see that as part of your role, which is not a bad thing. I mean, it's not a bad thing to have that be the case. It can be very rewarding, but it does sort of have a certain weight to it. There's no question about it.
Now, Uranus in the 4th house.
Wow.
Take it away. Go ahead.
I'd say it's a little bit unconventional and a little bit unsteady, but definitely a lively place. It may be the home of an eccentric artist or genius of some sort. It may be the place where you find this sort of wild parties happening, perhaps. Unconventional people. This might be the guy in the neighborhood who has, a fire truck parked in his front yard or a tractor in his front yard as a lawn decoration. Who knows? I mean,
I like that.
It's just that sort of wild, unpredictable quality to it. Of course, you might also find a lot of divorce there too.
And I was going to say Uranus in the 4th house, it can be sometimes the parents are divorced, but also and again, it does depend on other factors, but Uranus in the 4th house also is commonly, at least the work I've done, an indicator of a parent who was gone at an early age, whether they passed, whether it was through divorce, but it was a physical separation. Also, in terms of the home itself, for the person with Uranus in the 4th house, putting down roots. It could be like trying to put down roots on a moving train. There can be a lot of moves, or the household itself. There's just where do the surprises come? Where does the chaos come?
Yeah.
It can be in the family.
That's a great point. I had a client who had Uranus in the 4th, and she was a military brat. And so her father was moving every year and a half, 2 years. So she thinks she'd been through 10 or 12 schools by the time she graduated high school. So that sense of, turnover, that sense of sort of electric kind of thing running all around all the time is very much the case there. I think that's a really strong indication for the Uranus in the 4th house. Another characteristic I was going to mention would be the sort of the unusual kinds of marriages, non-traditional marriages. Now, I don't like to go into that phrase because we have to define what traditional is. I mean,
right.
But there also is the possibility for unconventional partnerships or unconventional living arrangements with that as well.
No, definitely.
And that could apply to like your college dorm. If you have unusual, you have somebody from another country and you're supposing you're going to school and you're living with somebody from a foreign country. That might be an unusual, but a very enlightening experience. It's just a way of saying there's a new way of looking at it.
Well, I think when we talk about, say, an unconventional arrangements, it's got to be defined in the time that you're living, right?
Exactly. So that would vary based on time, right? So what is considered to be unconventional in 1860 might be very conventional now, but what's conventional and what's unconventional now might be totally conventional in the future. So it has that. It is right. It's all about time and place,
right?
Yeah.
Now, Neptune in the 4th house. Now, that's another place when it comes to, I'm going to say family, to parents, to the nurturing, where I've seen many times a person grows up and a parent, and I'm going to say, is not available. They may be physically there, but either they are emotionally unavailable, or sometimes there have been issues. It could be an illness, an addiction, but I've seen that.
I was going to say addiction, yeah. Addiction is strong there. And also there may be a disconnect between family members where one says something, the other person doesn't quite get it right. And there's that whole quality. And of course, there's also the idea of, what does Neptune? Neptune is photography, is sort of, theater acting. There may be a sense of drama that is brought in with that, psychological drama that could go over the top in that case.
In the higher sense, I do feel for Neptune in the 4th house, the home is a sanctuary. And the person very often with a Neptune in the 4th, they need to be home. They need their space. They need to be able to recharge their batteries.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that's where you could do that because it does provide you that safe harbor where you wouldn't have to deal with the outside world. But there is that, and there might be some unrealistic expectations about what comes out of the family or what people expect from the family. They may be, their expectations may not live up to what is real.
Neptune in the fourth house is often an indicator of someone who is, again, they're seeking their tribe, because the tribe that they were born into, they're the odd person out.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I can totally see that. And then we get to Pluto. Pluto, is Pluto is the toughie in the neighborhood, because Pluto, I think in some ways we think of it as a karmic representation, or perhaps a past life representation of the house. I think you might almost find yourself in a situation by virtue of where you are supposed to be, or where you were destined to be. This is the sort of your fait accompli, so to speak, of where you're supposed to be.
So I have Pluto in the fourth house. And so, wherever you find Pluto in the chart, sometimes there's a struggle for control. And I will say that that's absolutely true. My daughter has Pluto in the fourth house, and I'm sure if she was here, she would say the same thing. Yeah. And the thing about it is, and I say, I got along great with my mother, but my mother, it was, no matter where you were, it was her home where she was at the head of the table. And so the control for me of being heard, of really feeling like, I'm really in charge here. That was tough. That was something that I grew up also being being the youngest child. And the other thing about Pluto in the fourth house, a lot of times there are family secrets. There are things that nobody talks about. And, in highlight, like, look, who cares? But growing up, looking back at my life, it was like, who was adopted and didn't know it, or who, things of that nature. It doesn't mean they were bad, that they were all, terrible things, but family issues, and even things, and I've said in my past, there were a lot of deaths. I've had, overdoses, suicides, murders, so Pluto in the fourth house, I think, can be I think it is a karmic placement, but I think it can be at times a very heavy placement. On the positive sense, I look at Pluto and I say, hey, it is about regeneration, right? It is about transformation and rebirth. But I have to be honest with you, I've seen it on the physical sense, where people with Pluto in the fourth house can be very much in terms of real estate or property. That's where I see it work out, I'm going to say, very productively. They buy houses, they rehab houses, things of that type, things of that nature.
Yeah, they buy them and flip them. Yeah, I think that's true. I think also, I think your comment about sort of the transitions that happen in the case of a family, I think that's very valid. You may have people who, there are some families that I know of who seem to have an inordinate amount of tragedy in their lives. I know a guy who lives down the street from me. He lost his wife, he lost his son, and then his house had a fire. And it's like, wow, this guy is just getting hammered. And I don't know his chart or anything else about that, but it's like, wow, this seems to be a very Plutonian quality to this whole situation. It just has those characteristics. That's sort of that very, I don't want to say dire, but there is a certain
heaviness,
cloud over the house kind of event. How do you lose a wife, a son, and then have a fire in your house all within the span of 2 years? It's just, wow. I'm sure it's brought out in his own personal chart, but that would be the sort of thing that we would see with that strong Pluto in that house there. Yeah.
Because Pluto, we say, transformation is a wonderful word, and it can be very positive. Right. But a lot of times transformation is a nice, way of saying something gets sort of killed off first.
Right, yeah. And I think that's one of the things that, I'll just take a little divergence here about astrology and astrologers. We've got to be careful when we talk about Pluto, because it can send the wrong message. I always try to couch it in something that's positive. If I see somebody with a strong transiting Pluto going to their second house, say, for example, I'm not going to say, hey, don't invest money, you're going to lose a lot of money. They could also come into a windfall. It is a game-changing kind of quality. That's not to say it won't manifest itself later, but what I'm saying? It has that certain quality to it.
Well, and I think the other side of it, and I'll say speaking for myself, because again, I do have this Pluto in the fourth house, but in my chart, Pluto is connected to my sixth house, my work service. So look at that. I actually did briefly work in real estate. I was terrible at it, selling it, but then in law, I worked in sophisticated real estate, and I have worked from home. Certainly, what is Pluto it's a spiritual planet, it's a metaphysical planet. Hey, I'm an astrologer, look at the work that I do. And so again, looking at the house rulership, I think very often when you bring that in, you do see the positive, certainly of Pluto. But in and of itself, like I say, for my personal, that's been my personal experience, but my Pluto is not, it goes back to the whole chart and the aspects and the connections.
Right, of course, it's much deeper. We're talking about this just from a sort of a cursory level, 10,000-foot view.
Yeah.
Just general what it's like. But those are very good illustrations of what I think was like. And I think that's where we find the validity for this, is that we get these snippets of the themes that we find, and we see these stories about people who have this strong characteristic, and you can see it supports the example very strongly. Pluto is not to be feared. I think there's something about Pluto that is, we all have a Pluto in our lives, and there's something about it that says you've got to accomplish something that is Plutonian in its nature in order to fully come to fruition as a human being. At some point in your life, you have to face this, I think, wherever that may be natally.
For Pluto, and I think it gets triggered by the transit. And to me, it's you're giving something up. You're letting go of something, and very often something you feel like it's being taken from you. It's something not necessarily that you say, "Oh my God, I can't live without it," but it's something that's meaningful, and it's gone. And it's like, well, where do I go from here? And Pluto does replace. It's the one thing I will say. Whatever Pluto takes away, I believe it does clear it away, because it served its purpose in your life, and it's time to rebuild. But I always say this about Pluto transits, the hard ones in particular, and I say to my clients, by the end of it, it's going to be over. You're going to get replaced. You never look back and say, gee, I'm so glad I went through all of that. But you will look back and say, I never dreamed I could be in this place.
Exactly. And while it's not fun going through it, you have to take, I think that's the gem of the nugget that the universe is providing us, is that Pluto does take away, it does tear down, and it does rebuild. And I can point to experiences in my life where I had a very strong Plutonian experience. And now that years have gone by and time has passed, I can safely say that, no, I would not be where I am today had that not happened. So yes, you do get a gift at the end of the roller coaster ride. The roller coaster stops, and things do come into place. So I think there's definitely a gift to that. As was true with almost all of astrology, there's always a dual quality to it. There's something is given, but something is gotten.
I think also with Pluto, it shows you what you're made of, and you discover that there's a lot more strength. Yeah. Than you ever realized, that you had.
And I think, when we see these planets in this house in particular, and the archetypal sort of representation that they bring, we can see this in people's lives. Like I told you, that person whose father was in the military, they were constantly, they had Uranus in their fourth house, and every 18 months they were in a different part of the country. And as a teenager, a teenager trying to make friends in a new high school every time, it drives you crazy. It makes them a different person than if they had the stability of always going, home all the time. If they had a moon in Cancer or something like that.
No, because they couldn't put down roots.
You couldn't put down roots. The roots would not take. trying to plant a tree on a rock. They kept
getting pulled up.
Yeah, there's
exactly.
no moss gathered there. Well, anyway, we've done this. We've done the fourth house. It looks like we're pretty well set. Next, we'll be up on the list. We'll get around to the seventh. And I think we're pretty much wrapped up, unless you got more to say, Deborah, which I'm sure you do.
Yes, but not on the fourth house, so that's okay.
Oh, wow.
But I look forward. I've got plenty to say on the seventh house. Seventh house is going to be really interesting, because it's not just marriage and partnership and life partners, but it's professional, right? It's business partners. It's even your enemies. Quite frankly, it's your adversaries. It's your competitors. So there's a lot going. It's clients too, as a matter of fact. So there's will be a lot to talk about with the seventh house.
Yeah, we always find a lot to talk about, no matter where we are. So I wouldn't worry about that. So I think we'll be okay. Anyway,
I think so.
Yeah. This is He Says, She Says Astrology, right? And we're back.
We're back.
Okay, very good. We'll talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to He Says, She Says Astrology podcast. For more information or to schedule a private personal reading by either Chris Flisher or Debra Clement, visit chrisflisher.com, turningatthewheel.com, or debraclementastrologer.com, and subscribe for more great podcasts in the future.